Now it's my pleasure to introduce our panelists for today's broadcast, who are joining us from Bristol in the United Kingdom. First, I would like to introduce Catherine Newport, Senior HR Consultant of Advisory Services at Radius. Catherine oversees Radius's HR advisory client engagements on a global scale, developing and implementing policy and change programs to support employee relations objectives globally. Also on the broadcast today, of indirect tax for Radius. Nick leads the indirect tax practice on the Radius advisory team and advises clients across all industries and countries, providing insight and support on international VAT matters for U.S.-based firms entering and operating in foreign markets. Catherine and Nick, a number of questions have been submitted over the last week. Our first question today comes to us from David, and his question is focused on getting started. Nick, perhaps you could lead with this question. David asks, the biggest issue I have is in my role. I guess from an HR and tax finance perspective, what are the key areas you see missed? What are the key areas that must be addressed?
Thanks, Ed. So yeah, it's a relatively common couple of questions there for our clients that are perhaps just starting out on international expansion and perhaps haven't delved into that area previously. So I think the key things really at this stage, if you are at that juncture, is to kind of just have a clear plan in your mind of what you want to achieve through international expansion and where you want to achieve it. So you some sort of idea, some path that you want to follow, whether you want to just, for example, send or employ a couple of salespeople locally, maybe test what the market is in areas, what the demand will be for your products and services outside of the US. You already have a feel for, which is why you're thinking about international expansion. But are you going to start off with a relatively light touch, with perhaps thinking about engaging a contractor or having an employee outside of the US to kind of start some marketing activity to try and generate some in a product or service, or actually are you thinking about something a little bit more substantial from the off? You have more confidence about the markets that you're perhaps going to go into and the demand that there will be for the products and services. In which case, you may consider a bigger startup in terms of headcount, establishing an entity overseas in a particular country, and then of course you really need to kind of decide which country you are going to establish yourself in as your first move into international expansion. So you may already have that in mind. You may already have an individual in mind to be your first overseas employee, that perhaps is someone that you've worked with as a contractor that you're going to convert. So I think the first step really is to understand what that initial phase will look like, and how aggressive you want to be in your initial plans. So a lot of clients start off with a relatively light footprint, light approach, to kind of guard against establishing too much overseas that ultimately may not work out, and may need to be kind of all wound up. So if you kind of start off small and then aim to grow from there, that's usually a pretty good strategy. Areas that must be addressed is, well, basically anything that's regulatory in the jurisdiction that you're looking to perhaps, whether it be to hire an employee or to engage with a contractor, or even from the off establish a subsidiary or a branch in that particular country. So wherever you go, there's going to be a series of regulatory things that must be considered and addressed. So there's going to be filings of various descriptions, of various types, including tax and filings relating to having an entity, so financial statements and things like that. If you're going to employ someone, obviously they need to be payroll. There's payroll registration, social security, etc. And then as your headcount grows, you start thinking about, which Catherine can perhaps expand on in a second. So it is kind of a difficult one, but just to emphasise that you should go into it with some sort of a plan in terms of what you want to achieve in the early stages of international expansion and how you're going to achieve it. But we often see clients take a relatively light touch approach as their first step, unless they've got a lot of confidence that they can pretty quickly internationally. Take a light approach to start off with, to test how the market is, to see how it goes, and you can expand from there, and that's usually a good platform.